I'm Sarah Glazer, the program manager at Literacy Works' Clear Language Lab.
Hi, and I'm Melanie Sampson, the program director at Literacy Works' Clear Language Lab.
Thank you for joining us for this conversation with leaders from CSH's Chicago team. They are the third recipients of our Community Leader Award, and we are honored to be talking with them today about their work and commitment to advancing communication equity.
CSH's mission is to advance affordable housing aligned with services as an approach to help people thrive. They do this by advocating for effective policies and funding, equitably investing in communities, and strengthening the supportive housing field. Clear Language Lab has been fortunate to get to work with CSH for several years now on several different projects, ranging from things like guidebooks to program process instructions, internal facing documents, and trainings and more. And we're just really happy to be able to celebrate the work you're doing in the housing space. And I'm happy to introduce some staff from CSH we have here with us: Julie Nelson, Richard Rowe, and Stephanie Sideman. Thank you all for joining us for this conversation and the work you do. And please feel free to tell us a little bit about yourselves and your work at CSH.
Well, thank you again for the recognition, and we're, really just honored because plain language is so important to us as a team. It's something CSH has been learning about and growing into, knowing that we want to do better. So we're just really appreciative of the recognition. My name is Julie Nelson. I'm the Associate Director on the Illinois team. I use she, her pronouns, and a lot of my work is really focused on the intersection of health and housing.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Sideman. I use she, her pronouns, and work as a senior program manager on the CSH team here in Illinois. And most of my work is centered around systems change work and removing barriers of access to housing.
Richard.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Richard Rowe, and I work as a senior program manager here at CSH. And a lot of my work is around technical assistance, trainings, and another part of my work is around justice involvement, trying to reduce barriers for people accessing housing.
Thank you so much. And whoever would like to chime in is fantastic. If all three of you have something to say about the questions we have coming up, we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of plain language, especially connected to the housing center and some other parts of the work that we've seen highlighted with CSH that we're excited to share with everyone watching. But tell us a little bit about just whatever comes to mind around the idea of communication equity and plain language, and just how it fits with your work at CSH and why it's important. Especially, we know for the housing sector, it can be challenging to talk about complicated systems. So yeah, I'd love to hear, how did you kind of feel the importance in making this part of the work in your journey at CSH?
I think it really, CSH, historically, we have a lot of expertise in the housing sector: affordable housing development, supportive housing development. All of that is really full of jargon. In the past, we really tended to be communicators that use a lot of academic language or use kind of the complex language of our sectors. However, if we really want to, be accessible to the community and to all of our stakeholders, which is everyone, but when I think about all of our stakeholders, it's each other as employees, it's the providers that we're working with, it's tenants, it's prospective tenants, it's maybe folks who have never been exposed to becoming a developer before, but want to kind of get into the space of supportive housing development. And if we want to move towards being a more accessible organization, plain language has to be at the foundation of that. I think it's also a big part of being trauma-informed and just reaching out to the community in a way that's working for community rather than what works, for me. It's really trying to recenter so that we're communicating in a way that works best for folks rather than communicating in a way that's convenient for me.
I'd love to give an example. We were fortunate enough to work with you recently on reasonable accommodation templates and an explanation for what are reasonable accommodations. And when a person is experiencing a housing crisis and denied from housing, it is a low point. That rejection is painful and it is probably one of many. And while folks are in a low point, they're often given something that says something to the effect of, you are denied housing, maybe because of your credit or for whatever reason, and you have 14 days to appeal. But there typically isn't much language or any help at all to understand what is an appeal, what is a reasonable accommodation, how could I, as a person with a disability, denied housing based on something related to my disability, share that that's discriminatory and I should be allowed into the housing under the Fair Housing Act. And this particular policy or program should change to accommodate my needs. That isn't spelled out very clearly. So people often receive a rejection, and that's the end of that story. They may look for housing elsewhere. And working with you, we now have a tool that not only offers an explanation for what is this, but walks through social stories and examples, offers templates and guidance. And what we've seen is both providers and participants in the midst of the solution phase are able to quickly pick up and go ahead and submit an appeal to that denial or reasonable accommodation, and then move into the housing. And that the solution is clear, accessible. I put in just what's relevant to me. I can keep the template the same. I go ahead and submit without having to worry, was the point made? Because the process walks you through to be certain you can be successful. That is just such a winning answer to, the world is confusing, the message is confusing. Well, here's a streamlined, clear way to follow a path, and that the end of the path is keys to your front door. That's such a nice answer to the problem. And while very unfortunate that anyone would have to be denied in the first place, in the very least, let's turn that denial around, and here's an easy to understand process that would not have been provided by the landlord. So just wanted to highlight that that recent tool that you crafted for us has been used many times very successfully, and speaks to the need for people to have in their hands something that's easy to understand and follow, and then use.
Yeah. So what I would add is, this is something that we've been so excited about because there's a lot of jargon, there's a lot of different terminology, and it's confusing not only to the experts, but thinking about the folk that we're serving, those participants, so you can only imagine what that may be like for them. And with using this plain language, it's just been super helpful. And we've gotten a lot of responses of and gratitude for breaking it down, better understanding like all of these different terms, put it in some simple language, tell us exactly what we're talking about. So me as a person with lived experience, right? So I totally relate to, this academic speak versus, the experiential knowledge. So we may be saying the same thing, but we just didn't have those tools to bridge that. So you have been so much of a help in helping us bridge this. So super grateful for that. And I can see this being used. I do know that on our team, Illinois team, we often have these conversations about ways to use this, and it's been a useful tool. And we can't thank you enough for that.
Thank you all for the work you do. I know the housing sector is very stressful and there is never enough to meet the need. And so it's so important, the work you do. And it's great hearing the stories. We don't always, everyone's so busy, we don't always get to follow up. So thank you for sharing those.
Some of what you were talking about, Richard, actually transitions very nicely into our next question, which is about how much you all prioritize working and co-designing with people who have lived experience. And so we were hoping you could talk a little bit more about why that's important to you and kind of how what that looks like at CSH, and then any advice you have for organizations that maybe haven't implemented that co-designing with people with lived experience piece yet. What advice you might give them?
So I'll just start. Yeah, I'll just say that recently we did a leadership uh, curriculum, and it in the development stages we brought in people with lived expertise to help us co-design this. And there we discovered that a lot of the terms that we were using didn't come across, or they weren't easily understood. Uh, and so it was pointed out to us, hey, why don't you just say this? you know, but it's super important in terms of empowering the potential recipients, um, just so they know exactly we're saying the same thing. We're just saying it in a different way. So in that sense, this was, well, doing that, we discovered that this is the route to go. In order to empower them, we have to have that plain language, and that way they felt more, they bought in more to it. And then they were easy. I mean, it was easier for them to understand what we were talking about, and easier for them to articulate, and provide different uh, suggestions and recommendations using their language uh, in the curriculum development.
I'd love to bring in a quote from Regina Cannon, who's a CSH alum and leader in the racial equity field. And this was from a HUD training that she led for a variety of communities on this topic, where she had said, people who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And knowing that to be 100% true, if you don't find yourself in a position where you are working with folks closest to the solution, it will take years to find the solution, or longer, or never. So you should put yourself closer to the solution by connecting with people who know it from experience, and that is truly the only way to know your way out of the problem.
I love that. That's such a true and powerful quote and statement, and just about like doing community driven work, and that yeah, people who've experienced things know what works and what doesn't. And if you're not collaborating with them and learning from their experience, you're going to miss the mark. You just will.
We have spoken a little bit about this, but I'd love to talk, if you have any more thoughts about just the challenges that specifically the housing sector face in making things clear. I think we've definitely seen an uptick in like housing related training and projects, and it excites me because I just know how vital housing is and the supports around housing is. So yeah, I'd just love to hear if you have anything else you'd like to add about just like the specific needs of the housing sector in terms of the complicated nature of it sometimes, and why that's so important to explain clearly.
Melanie, I appreciate that you just said it's sometimes complicated. It's always complicated, at least from my seat. And I think this really, the housing system looks the way it does because it is a scarce resource that is really coming from the foundations of systemic racism and redlining and inequitable access to housing and kind of all of those structures, which results in a system where there are, I always throw out a random number, sometimes I say 18 bazillion, sometimes I say 15. But there really are so many different paths to housing because it is such a scarce resource they kind of each behemoth system, each giant part of the housing system, and each housing type has its own structure and its own path to navigate, oftentimes its own eligibility criteria, because it really is not streamlined. The continuum of care, which is how the HUD dollars for addressing homelessness in the community flow down from the federal level to get to the local level. That's still only one type of housing resource and funding. There are multiple others in any given state and in Illinois. And so given those complexities, it just kind of allows the system to keep doing what it does, rather than really forcing all of us in these systems to be like, wait a minute, how do we really actually unpack this as a system? How do we make it easier to navigate? And how do we make it easier to talk about how to navigate it? Really by nature, the scarcity of it allows these systems to kind of keep things really complicated, because there's always someone to fill a unit, because there's just not enough units. And that's not a good practice, because we know who gets left out. We know who gets excluded when systems function this way.
And so thinking about this, like the complexity of the system, I think one of the things that you all prioritize is thinking about making communications clear kind of at all levels of that process. So not just thinking about the community facing things, but also working with property managers and housing agency staff to make sure that things are clear for them as well. So can you tell us a little bit more about why plain language is important at all levels, not just for housing seekers?
I could give an example. We partner with the state of Illinois to help support their efforts with a program called the Statewide Referral Network, which is a pathway to housing for people in Illinois who are under a certain income threshold and are connected to services. But many service partners are maybe in a position where they have not yet heard about the statewide referral network, or maybe had connected years ago and are not currently connecting. And so one aspect of our work has been promoting that this exists and that there is housing, and reaching an audience of folk who are incredibly overworked and understaffed and possibly looking to solve one crisis at a time just based on how social services are funded. And what we are saying is pause from all that, because it will be worth your while to get people connected to a system that has affordable and subsidized housing to offer. But if we don't have very clear directions and language around what is the statewide referral network in terms of access to housing for people they serve, how to sign up, how does it work, how to get people connected. If it's too much of a maze or it's too complicated, then the providers may not be able to connect, which means the people they serve will not be offered housing. So that's just one example of a level where we've worked with your organization to come up with all of the materials on our SRN webpage for this now, and a user guide, and adjoining videos and PowerPoints, and really all of the resources that try to break down any question people could have. There's a space for an answer for that, and it's easily at your fingertips. And if you'd want to pick up a phone, we'd be so happy to talk to you. But for the most part, most people who are connected in didn't pick up a phone. They saw it on paper and were able to follow steps because it was with clear language, right? That made it accessible. And anyway, I give this as just one example to say, if you have an audience you're trying to serve, you might be able to reach them directly. But if it's within a system that's complicated, things fall apart. So streamlining processes and really just creating language around how to do what people are trying to do in a way that makes sense to people, right? Can really took us from a place of not having many applications at all in about 50 counties in the state of Illinois to a significant boost within 25 of those counties. And I would credit the marketing materials and the work that we did together that made it a process that was easy to follow.
The only thing I would add is the system is just, you know, in the day-to-day work, you know, it's just so complicated. And in order to change a system, and because we're intending it to work for the people that it was built for, but in order to change that, we have to, and I love the word that Stephanie used, we have to pause, you know, at some point in order to make sure that everybody is speaking the same language, you know, in how we're defining whatever it is that we're defining, ensuring that the potential participants, the clients, their understanding of what we're doing, and the providers who are providing the services, right, ensuring that their terminology is the same, you know. So we often, for, you know, I don't know how long we've been doing this, but you know, this is a way to at least do a pulse check, you know, to ensure that everyone is on the same page, you know, and that way we can get to empowering, right, the participants, and also a sort of like a paradigm shift from the participants just reacting to, um, but also allowing them a space to lead some of this work, you know, from their perspective. But you have to understand, meaning providers and the system has to understand what they're talking about. What did they mean by this? So this allows us to kind of take a pause and ensure that we're all on the same, that we're all speaking the same language.
That's such a great point, that the idea of building in that space to take a breath and say, wait a minute, we need to like get some other perspectives in here. And I think that's such a challenge. Sometimes everyone has their head down and they're trying to work. But sometimes we have to kind of also be thinking about the systems change stuff, even if we're in the middle of doing the right now work. And that can be really hard. So it's really awesome to just recognize the making that space can be really powerful and create a lot of that change that we're hoping to see happen. So thank you for those examples. Those are great. Are there any other advice or feedback for either the housing sector or just the greater nonprofit sector or the government sector or other sort of mission driven work around communication? Anything else anyone wants to add about feedback, or if people are sort of struggling to make the case at their organization of what might be helpful for them to know?
I think like from my seat and having, you know, for us as a team really focusing on this the last few years, it's so important to just be intentional, you know, and it requires that intention. It also requires that expertise. I continue to be in learning space. I will always be in learning space about improving my communications and using plain language. And I think starting with the intention, because what I've seen time, and I say this about myself as well, right? If I write something really fast and, you know, then that's it, it probably is not going to be the most accessible plain language document I come up with. For me, that requires the time and investment to be like, okay, I need to take that pause, come back to it, look at it again, and also just kind of collectively agree in our work that this is how we want to do the work. That it really is a core value, because, you know, it's so important to not just presume only one audience also needs plain language. We all need plain language. You know, plain language makes everything accessible at all levels for everyone. So why would we not want to do that? You know, why would I really only want to reach 10% of my prospective audience or 5%. Like, I don't think that's anybody's goal. And so for us to really reach who we want to reach and really engage with folks around their concerns and needs and how we change these systems, you know, accessible communication and just being on the same page with people, and making information transparent. Because that's another way I think systems function, right? Is if things aren't transparent to everyone, and if we're including everyone around the table, you know, systems will keep working exactly how they were designed and how they're functioning today. So I think all those pieces are really critical, but it has to start with kind of just the intention and commitment to that.
I love that connection with your values too, of like you're saying this is our value to be transparent, to be clear for that matter, and just making those connections of like, oh wait, our communications don't align with that, and we need to address that to be more intentional and to make those connect more. And I think that's definitely a challenge that a lot of folks face. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
There's one thing that I'd be remiss if I didn't say. So Julie that's leadership. And that's huge for any organization that you need to have leadership. It's imperative that leadership allows, that space and creates that space and the buy-in. And you need that from the top. And I'll say that about CSH. This goes all the way to the top, and that's one of the things that I enjoy. And it's a must. It's a must that you have that buy-in and support from leadership.
That is so true and so wonderful that you all do have Julie and leadership who do care about this and advocate for it and like prioritize it, right? It is a priority in the work that you're doing. The plain language and clear communication. You've already shared a lot of really wonderful examples of how these projects you've been pushing forward with plain language and some really wonderful examples of the positive impact that they've had in your work. But I wanted to give space if there's any other success stories you want to tell or differences you've noticed in with the different groups and stakeholders that you work with, in the impact that using plain language has had in your work.
So I'll just say this. There was an experience that we had. One of the participants, we were doing a focus group, and we were, just going through our slides and the information, and one of the participants mentioned, this is sort of like the business of homelessness. And that stood out. It was because of the terminology and the jargon. But that really resonated, and that was something, that always would stick with me. And of course, that helped us shift, from that. So we wanted to better understand exactly what the participant was, communicating to us. And that spoke volumes. And that was just in one focus group. So, and she had she was bold enough and brave enough to to point that out. And, that will always resonate, with me. And so I'll never forget that. But that caused us to reach out. Hey, hey, Melanie, how can we say this different? So we have to listen.
I could offer one more example. Back in I can't remember, maybe 2016 or 2017, CSH, embarked on a journey with the Chicago Continuum of Care to play a leadership role within the Chicago Coordinated Entry System, which is meant to be a system that coordinates housing for people experiencing homelessness in Chicago. with one housing application and one process, so that it isn't that people need to go to every door to see if they can find housing in that location, as Julie mentioned, for the dollars that stream through Chicago from housing and urban development. HUD at that time had said, here is a deadline by which all communities will create a system, and these are the things you will put together in that time frame. And I think for most communities around the country, it was a bit of a rush to check off the boxes, because it's a mandate, it's tied to funding, and you'd like to do well by the funder and continue to receive more dollars for more housing, that type of thing. And we created a policy and procedure guide just as fast as we could. Later, when we had time to take a step back and see pieces are there, but not in some kind of way that everyone understands. And if every one of us left and new people adopted this policy and procedure guide, we're not absolutely sure how anybody would interpret much of this. It's in our heads, but is it on paper in some kind of way that's helpful? So we had turned to you to ask, could you help? And you created a clear language version of a very complex, policy and procedure guide. You were asking earlier, what would you suggest to other nonprofits and government and such? For all of the documents that were already created, I would suggest it's never too late to look at them and say, well, this is not understandable, or parts of this are not reaching an audience in a way we would have hoped for a public document. And it's just never too late to go back and turn that into a product that you could put in anyone's hands with confidence that it not only would a person be able to read this, but read it and understand and articulate and implement and follow and do and get from it what they need, what they're looking in it for in the first place. And that was really helpful for us and for our community, and also just a good lesson that nice to be proactive, but never too late to go back.
I love that. Yeah, it's never too late. The plain language story. You can always, yeah, and it's hard sometimes. I think that idea of it's hard to go back and look at something that you want to evolve, because it can feel or it can feel like I don't want to draw attention to this thing. All these feelings can come up. It can be very emotional, I find. So I appreciate that. Yeah, just saying, you know what, let's give this a go. So that's a great example. And yeah, Richard, to your point, the description you just gave around the person feeling like it sounded like business, it's so interesting, because housing is something so personal and so emotional, like where you live. And so, yeah, to recognize how that must feel to hear it be talked about so perfunctory, that's really interesting, just dichotomy there. So that's a really cool example. Thank you for sharing it. And I guess that kind of leads to second to last question, but yeah, have you had any other surprises or unexpected outcomes when you sort of kind of flipped the script and presented information in different or new ways? And maybe not, maybe you're like, that's exactly what I hoped would happen, but just leaving space in case there's anything that kind of surprised you, or was maybe an additional benefit that you didn't expect.
I mean, I'll share the example that Richard shared about the business of homelessness, and the personal experience of homelessness, and juxtaposing, those two pieces. That's the same example I thought of when you asked that question to all of us, because and that really kind of core issue drove trying to simplify how these giant buckets of money work and how these giant buckets of money for housing flow. Because if we want to support folks in being at the decision-making table, that means people also need information and knowledge. Because what Kayla had been sharing was, she understood deeply what the experience is of riding a train when you don't have somewhere else to be that night. what she was highlighting was that coming to some of these other tables that are really about system change and highlighting, like, this is what isn't working, this is where we need to get. If you don't have kind of the 20 years that maybe some others have had of working in these systems that come with these giant buckets of money, how can you possibly catch up? How can you possibly kind of be at that table and be an effective leader if you don't know how some of those wheels turn? And so that really drove us to, okay, yes, we absolutely need to communicate how these big buckets of money work. Most importantly, who decides how the big buckets of money get spent. Because if you want to move those levers in a way that's going to work better for the folks closest to these problems, we also have to be really transparent and talk about, like, here's the money, here's how it works, who decides, here's how it gets decided, so that then folks can strategically say, like, oh, so that means I need to get involved in this kind of way and to do this because I want to accomplish whatever change folks are looking for. But without that understanding and transparency and good communication about the business of homelessness, folks are really, your hands are kind of tied, right? Because you just don't have the information that you need to truly advance your perspective and your agenda.
Yeah, like how do you get in a room with people who've been doing this for decades, like you said, and then are using shorthand and are just inferring things and feel confident jumping into those situations. So it's really great to hear that side of things, of thinking about how to share things in a way that people feel empowered to go in those spaces and say, wait a minute, I have ideas, and be able to articulate them. That's great. That's a great example.
As we get to the end of our conversation together, is there anything else you'd like to share about your work or communication equity? Anything else you want to highlight for the folks watching this conversation?
I'll share my reflections. Much like anti-racism work, which is like the long term that doesn't stop. There's not like, oh, magically we're an anti-racist organization tomorrow kind of a process. I feel very similarly about plain language. It's something I need to continue working at. I need to continue paying attention to and continue growing in that space to be effective. Thinking about how we're dismantling like white supremacy culture and how that shows up in housing and in our organizations and all these other places. I think accessibility is also a piece of that picture, and plain language is a piece of that picture as well, because, how can we recreate systems and bring transparency and leadership of folks who are impacted by those problems if we're not kind of having all of these pieces at the foundation?
Oh, thank you. I think that is a fantastic note to end on. We are so grateful for all the work you do. I know working in the housing sector, I did it for a hot minute, is very hard work. And you're working with folks that are going through a lot of different experiences and these complicated systems. So thank you so much for all you do, and thank you for being plain language champions and taking time to talk with us today. We're really grateful for it. Thank you, and we hope to keep working with you. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for improving our work.